almost time, Rose.
This American psychological horror directed by Parker Finn is based on an award-winning short film. Within 2 weeks after its release, this film managed to earn a profit of $100 million, which is an extraordinary achievement in the global film industry. It tells the story of a psychiatrist who becomes a patient of a psychologist after witnessing a traumatic event in his life. Starting from a smile full of terror, the psychiatrist actually sank into darkness, with no one to help. Can he be released from the bondage of the devil's smile? Here's the story. A middle-aged woman looks lifeless on her bed because of an overdose. The woman's room looked very messy and unkempt. She is a wife and mother of 2 beautiful daughters. Rose, the youngest child, could only freeze silent, watching her mother die before her eyes. Rose wakes up at her desk, having dreamed of a traumatized childhood. He gets a call from the administration to treat a patient named Carl who is suffering from severe depression. Dr. Rose Cotter immediately conducted a screening to find out how severe the disorder was experienced by the new patient. The man seemed unresponsive to anything that was happening around him. He kept muttering and repeating the painful words that were always planted in his mind. Apart from muttering death sentences and swearing, Carl could only cry. After checking, Rose headed to the administration to make further observations on Carl Rankin for a few days. Not long after, a female patient arrived at the psychiatric hospital with her body bound tightly because she rebelled and refused to be examined. At the same time, Rose meets with her boss, Dr. Desai, to explain her decision to transfer a patient to another unit that is draining the hospital's budget. Rose emphasized that the action was necessary because patients needed it for their health. Dr. Desai emphasized that Rose had to do the job as directed by her superiors and also think about the hospital budget. The next day, Rose had a new patient, a 26-year-old woman named Laura Weaver. The girl was a graduate student who was reported to the police for unpleasant behavior. The police sent Laura to a mental hospital because the girl's behavior shows significant disturbance. From the police investigation, it is known that Laura suffered severe trauma after the terrible incident on her campus. Exactly 2 weeks ago, Laura saw a lecturer on campus who hit himself on the head with a hammer to death. Laura is the only witness in this tragic tragedy and becomes suspicious because there are no other witnesses. Rose immediately went into the observation room to meet Laura. The girl looked scared and silently stood in the corner of the room. Rose coaxed Laura to sit with her and assured her it was safe for everyone. While squeezing her own stomach because she was so scared, Laura rushed to sit in front of the psychiatrist. Laura explains that she is not crazy at all and still remembers everything that happened. He is an outstanding student who is a candidate for the doctoral program. Rose asked Laura to be calmer and tell her in detail what really happened. The girl looked very nervous and said she often saw some unknown entity. The entity was only chasing after him without anyone else being able to see the figure apart from him. Sometimes the entity appears like a recognized person but sometimes like a stranger. Laura said that the entity had appeared to resemble the figure of her grandfather who had died when Laura was 7 years old. The figure gave a smile filled with terror that made anyone afraid to see it. Rose asks if Laura's family suffers from severe hallucinations. Laura immediately confirmed that she was not hallucinating. He always heard whispers from that entity saying that today is the time to die. Rose again explained that in theory humans who experience intense trauma will think that their hallucinations are real. Laura became increasingly hysterical knowing that Rose did not believe her words. Laura believes she is not depressed or hallucinating. He tells the real truth, not mere imagination. Instantly Laura looked up right behind Dr. Rose. The beautiful girl toppled out of her chair and crawled backward as if some invisible entity was about to attack her. Laura is having a seizure where her mouth is wide open. Rose called the administration asking for help as soon as possible. After calling for help, Rose found her patient standing quietly with a smiling face. Decorative plant pots on the table shattered on the floor. Laura clutched a sharp piece of ceramic that had been thrust into her own cheek. With a big smile, he scratches his face down to his neck, forming a smile symbol. Blood was pouring all over Laura's body until she couldn't breathe anymore. Rose looked down limply, seeing the unfortunate incident right in front of her eyes. What Laura experienced as the only witness in her lecturer's death now happens to Dr. Rose. The medics who were about to help entered the room but were all too late. Laura died with a smile on her lips, but that smile brought terrible terror to Dr. Rose. And the movie started. After the incident, Rose was questioned by the police regarding the death of Laura Weaver. Rose explained her temporary diagnosis of Laura's mental disorder. According to her brief observations, Laura suffers from acute post-traumatic psychosis up to paranoid delusions. Rose confirms Laura smiled broadly right before her death. The white cloth that covered Laura's body formed a smile symbol which was drawn from the traces of blood on her neck. Rose returns to her house where a pet cat named Mustache immediately welcomes her. After showering and changing clothes, Rose calmed down for the night by having a drink. Inside the kitchen, Rose saw Laura's figure standing in front of her with a big smile. Immediately, Rose broke the glass in her hand, surprised by Trevor, the fiancé copyright who had just returned from work. Seeing that there was broken glass, Trevor realized that something was wrong with his girlfriend. Rose shared her unpleasant work experience this afternoon. Trevor calms Rose down and reminds her of dinner plans with Holly, Rose's older sister. They talked about planning a birthday party for Jackson, Holly's 7th child, for the weekend. Without thinking, Rose immediately said that she would not come because she was busy working. Holly felt that Rose should immediately leave her job and open her own practice so she could have Saturday and Sunday off. Holly and her husband seemed to despise Rose's work, which they thought could not be rich just by being a psychiatrist. They suggested selling the parents' inheritance. Rose was angry and cursed her own brother. The dinner atmosphere that was originally warm ended up being the worst and most unpleasant dinner. They returned home where Rose was as usual going to feed her beloved cat Mustache while Trevor immediately turned on the house's security alarm system. In the morning, Rose went back to work as usual. The police officer who was interrogating Rose named Joel approached her at the hospital to check on her old friend. Rose said she was fine and Joel didn't need to come to work. Wanda, the nurse in charge of administration, told Joel that Rose was engaged but he was still single. Rose immediately checked Laura's report when she was asked to become a witness in lecturer Munoz's death that morning. In her testimony sheet, Laura said that Munoz approached her with a hammer in his hand. For no apparent reason, Munoz hit himself repeatedly while the man's face kept smiling looking at Laura. Not long after, Rose got a call from Holly apologizing for her mean words last night. Rose opened the curtains of her study window and noticed a woman standing and staring at her. Holly is still on the phone asking Rose to send a gift electric card for Jackson's birthday. Rose just fell silent and hung up the phone to get back to work. As he passed Carl's room, he noticed a familiar smile on the male patient's face. Rose approached him while talking. Strangely, Carl just smiled with a blank stare. Rose snapped her fingers in front of Carl's eyes hoping to get a response from the patient. Suddenly, Carl looked into the doctor's eyes as he said that Rose would die soon. Rose screamed for help to calm down Carl, who was about to attack her. 2 male nurses ran and tied up Carl's body, which turned out to be preoccupied with sleeping. Rose is considered to provide information that is different from reality. Dr. Desai again asked Rose for information regarding his action of tying up Carl's sleeping body. He gave Rose a week's leave so that the psychiatrist could recover after the case of Laura, who committed suicide in front of him. Rose is considered to be traumatized and having hallucinations, especially since she always works overtime 80 hours a week for months. Rose walked into the car while taking deep breaths to calm herself down. Before arriving home, he took the time to buy an electric car as a gift for Jackson. Arriving home, Rose wrapped the gift in polka dot wrapping paper. That night, Trevor had not come home because of overtime at his office. Rose again felt anxious for no apparent reason. She took a sip of her drink to calm herself down, but suddenly the house's security alarm went off so loudly that Rose dropped the glass in her hand. The woman took a pair of scissors, just in case an intruder entered the house. After checking the front door, Rose saw no damage to it and immediately set off the alarm. The curtain at the back door was strangely drawn as if someone had opened the back door. Rose gets a call from security to confirm her condition after the alarm rings indicating danger. The security guard who spoke on the phone asked Rose to look back. Just as he was about to turn around, the phone rang again. Rose was very confused by the reality she faced. The phone that was originally in his hand was now where it used to be. Not long after, the police came to Rose to search all the rooms to make sure there were no intruders hiding in the house. They said the back door was not locked the last time it was closed. Trevor was quite surprised to see a lot of police gathered in front of the house. After explaining what had happened, Rose fed the mustache cat as usual. Trevor was a little suspicious as to why Rose had set off the house's security alarm when he wasn't home yet. If the security alarm turns on, Trevor cannot enter because he will be detected as an intruder. Rose only explained that her mind was confused all day. He immediately went to look for the cat mustache, which was nowhere to be found after many police came and searched the house. That night, Rose has another dream in which her mother overdoses in bed. Rose woke up in the middle of the night and couldn't get back to sleep. He chose to stay up all night while replaying Laura's voice recording when he was observed. Rose heard there was a soft whisper at the end before Laura died. He played a few times and turned up the volume to max and heard a whisper saying his name. Rose tried to reconfirm and repeat it again. The shock made Rose fall over and scream in fear. He took a kitchen knife and pointed it at Trevor, who woke up after hearing screams. The next day, Rose spends her free time seeing a professional psychologist named Madeline. After hearing Rose's full story, Madeline said that Rose still harbored trauma from the death of her mother, who was pregnant, by ingesting a lot of medicine. He advised Rose to take a break and make peace with her own trauma. Rose is still trying to convince Madeline that she is not having hallucinations. Madeline still diagnoses that Rose has fallen into a deep depression after seeing Laura die. Rose whined for the sedative Risperdal, which is used to treat bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. However, since Madeline saw no chronic disturbance in Rose, she could not prescribe the drug. Until the weekend, Rose decided to come to her own nephew, Jackson's birthday. He brought a gift containing an electric train at the request of his sister, Holly. They enjoyed the party until it was time to open the gifts. One by one, Jackson opened the gifts from the invitees. Don't forget to open Rose's gift and thank her before opening her dream electric train. Like a child in general, Jackson could not wait to see the contents of the gift from his aunt. When he opened the package in the box, his gaze changed drastically 180 degrees. As it turns out, the gift contained the dead cat mustache. Rose immediately hugged her dead cat while trying to explain that she was not the culprit. Everyone stared at Rose with hatred while Jackson was shaken by his aunt's slightly crooked behavior. Rose fell and broke the dining table containing Jackson's birthday cake. He cried like a child and was taken to the hospital. After destroying her own niece's birthday, Rose is increasingly confused about what really happened. He gawked in the medical procedure room at the symbol of pain. It is written there that if the pain is at 0, then the face that looks has a big smile. People were so panicked that even Trevor had a heated argument with Holly in front of the examining room. That night, Trevor brought Rose home. Rose really believed in her lover. He tries to explain if there is an evil entity that often disturbs him with terrible terror. Trevor couldn't believe in ghosts or supernatural entities because to him it was all bullshit. He even thought that Rose had the same genetic disease as her mother, namely mental disorders. Trevor chose to sleep on the couch while Rose was still investigating what curse had befallen him. He again opened the statement sheet of Laura Weaver's witness regarding the death of lecturer Munoz in the Agatha College campus library. At that time Rose heard a whisper from outside the bedroom door telling her to enter the dark room. Rose chose to ignore the sound and turned off the light before going to sleep. Unfortunately, the voice that called out to him continued to sound like it was his mother. Mother groans asked Rose to save her from death. Rose turned around while closing her eyes, but the terrible creature appeared right in front of the bedroom door. The next day, Rose was so distraught that she almost got hit by a car. He visited lecturer Munoz's house to find information regarding the man's death. Munoz's wife explained openly after Rose admitted she was a reporter. Victoria said that she noticed a small change in her husband before this terrible thing happened. Munoz was often agitated, paranoid, and screamed hysterically at night. Victoria admits that Munoz often talks to himself with unseen entities. The woman cried when she remembered Gabriel Munoz's face when he died. Victoria invites Rose into her late husband's study. There are various kinds of paintings that are claimed to have met Munoz. Of the many paintings, Munoz shows a face that he always sees and forces it to enter his body. Victoria also explained another image, namely the Munoz brothers who died in an accident 20 years ago. Gabriel Munoz began to experience changes since returning from the annual conference. Victoria claims her husband was depressed after seeing a woman who died in front of her husband's eyes. Rose asked who the woman was who was standing in front of Munoz, but Victoria couldn't remember her name. Rose explained that Munoz was not depressed or crazy at all. He said he also experienced the same thing as Victoria's husband. It seems that Victoria is still traumatized by her husband's death and immediately kicks Rose out of her house, especially since Rose suffers from the same disorder as Munoz. After thinking hard, Rose goes to see her old friend, who served in the local police, Joel. He asked Joel to trace the death case of a lecturer named Gabriel Munoz. Even though he was reluctant to work because the day he was off, Joel still tried to help and opened the death files from his laptop. From the report, it was known that there was another incident related to Munoz's death 2 weeks earlier, the Northern Police Force. Munoz was staying at a hotel when a woman suicided in front of him. The woman's name is Angela Powell. She is a real estate agent. Rose snatched Joel's laptop when she saw something odd about the policeman's expression. Apparently, the photo of Angela when she died looks terrible where her body is covered with stabs. Rose requests another tracing of the death reports related to Angela. Joel discovers another death that occurred 4 days before Angela's suicide. From the CCTV footage, Angela can be seen filling up with gas at the gas station alone. A man walked over and took garden shears and stabbed himself right in front of Angela. Rose realized there was something strange about the man. He asked Joel to stop the video while taking the scissors. It turned out that the man smiled broadly the same as Laura's smile before turning around. Joel begins to notice that there is a repeating pattern in the deaths of these connected people. Rose rushes home after printing the results of her investigation with Joel. Arriving at home, he was surprised by Trevor's behavior and asked Madeline to come to see him. It turns out they were talking about Rose's mental health problems, which Trevor thought were dangerous. Rose didn't accept Trevor's attitude, who cornered her without understanding her feelings at that time. They had a big fight until Rose left her own house for her sister Holly's house. As a family, Rose feels her sister's house is the right place to complain. Unfortunately, it's the other way around. Holly actually accuses Rose of having the same disease as their mother, who died of an overdose. The cruel words that came out of Holly's mouth always made Rose angry and changed to hurting Holly with sarcasm. Holly couldn't contain her emotions any longer. He cried and entered the house without caring about the fate of his own younger sibling. In desperation, Rose stepped into her car and took a deep breath to calm down and think clearly. Holly came back out of the house and walked over to Rose, and knocked on her sister's car window. Rose screamed hysterically from inside the car without anything happening there. Jackson was silent, watching the strange behavior of his aunt, who was getting more and more here. After being satisfied crying alone in the car until evening, Rose took out her disappointment by eating a burger. Joel called him later that night with shocking news. While Rose is gone, Joel digs deeper until he finds one person who has survived the series of deaths. The man's name was Robert Talley, a male accountant who had seen the suicide of his business partner. 4 days after seeing the incident, Robert suddenly killed an unknown woman. Surprisingly, a week later, the key witness to the murder committed by Robert also died, and the pattern repeated itself. Robert is now on Altoona's guard. Even though he can live, the rest of his life will only end up in prison. Rose immediately picks up Joel to head to Altoona prison that very night. On the way to Altoona, Joel says he believes all of Rose's stories, especially after learning about the successive deaths of several people in the police report. Rose felt very relieved because she finally found one person who believed in her and wanted to help sincerely. Arriving at Altoona, they spoke with Robert Talley and were given no more than 10 minutes. At that time, Rose did not admit that she had received a curse because she was afraid of being expelled, like what happened at Victoria Munoz's house. He asked how Robert Talley could survive the successive deaths because one of his patients had a disorder like Robert's. The man asks Joel to get out of the room and explains that the only way is to kill other people. When killing, he must make sure there are eyewitnesses who see so that the entity can move. Robert again explained that the scourge needed severe trauma to spread. The trauma that humans feel gives strength to these terrible creatures. Robert suggests that Rose's patient be given a weapon with which to kill others. Immediately Rose shouted that she could not kill anyone. Because he let slip, Robert finally found out that Rose was being followed by a killer creature. The man immediately screamed hysterically with fear until one of the handcuffs on his hand fell off. Rose immediately left the prison without sharing any information with Joel. Because it was already morning, Rose returned to her house to check all the death files related to the curse. Due to her frustration, Rose bit her own thumb until it bled. While cleaning her wound, Rose sees Madeline's doctor visiting her house. The doctor wanted to make sure that Rose was okay. He conducts annoying interviews whose contents corner Rose into being treated in intensive care or put in a mental hospital. Rose tried to stay calm and follow the flow that Madeline wanted. In the middle of the conversation, the phone rings. Madeline's real voice speaking over the phone confirmed that Rose was back home. Rose now felt exactly what Laura felt. The voice of the fake Madeline in front of him turned into the voice of a demon that was about to take Rose's life. The entity approached Rose and covered her mouth as if indicating that the time of Rose's death was getting closer. Rose ventured into a mental hospital and hid the knife in her jacket. He entered Carl's ward. He looked scared to see Rose there. Carl shouted loudly to make Dr. Desai check the situation. Rose took out a knife from inside her jacket and stabbed Carl's body repeatedly. Dr. Desai, who witnessed this, began to stress and tried to skin his own face. Rose wakes up from her nightmare and Dr. Desai approaches her in a car parked in front of the hospital. Seeing that there was a knife in Rose's car, Dr. Desai knew something was wrong with his subordinate. He tried to dissuade Rose, but she insisted on going alone. Rose sped off towards a faraway place. Joel had called her several times, but Rose chose to deal with her own trauma. He went to his parents' house, the place that gave him the heaviest trauma in his life and continues to haunt him all this time. Rose enters her childhood home while reminiscing all her childhood living with her parents. At the end of the hall, Rose entered her mother's room where the woman died. The scene flashes back in time when Rose catches her mother in pain. Mother begged Rose and asked the 10-year-old girl for help, who still didn't know what to do to overcome her overdose problem. Mom asked Rose to call an ambulance, but Rose didn't know what the number was. He just kept silent and closed the door to his mother's room while crying alone. At night, Rose still survives in the house by using a simple oil lamp. With the full alert, Rose seemed to be waiting for when her death came. He returned to check his mother's room where the door to the room opened by itself. In the room, Rose saw the figure of her mother who had started to corner her own child. Rose kept saying that everything she saw and heard at that time was not real. Her mother said that Rose's own mind had invited her. The woman started to grin widely with a terrible laugh. He said Rose's mind beckoned him to follow along. Rose slowly stepped back to leave the room and closed the door. A mother-like figure steps out with a giant body growing in size. The creature continues to chase to enter Rose's body. Rose's neck was strangled very strongly while saying that humans cannot run away from their own thoughts. Rose practiced controlling her mind and resisted with all her might. He broke the monstrous figure's arm bone and hit it on the head with an oil lamp. Suddenly the body of the terrible figure was burned to the ground, writhing and groaning for help. Rose crawled on the wall out of her own house watching the fire devour the old building. After completing her mission, Rose returns to town to meet Joel. He apologized for all the mess that happened and asked to stay with Joel until he was mentally recovered to live independently once again. Joel welcomed the intention of Rose's arrival while saying he would always be with Rose forever. That terror-filled smile returned to Joel's face. A terrified Rose tries to reach the exit. The woman ran out, but strangely she was in the middle of a field. When she turned around, Rose was still at her mother's house. He saw Joel's figure there and immediately ran back into the house. Rose doesn't realize that Joel in front of her mother's house is the real Joel. Joel kept shouting for Rose to open the door. However, in a frantic and confused mind, Rose chose to stay in the house until the terrible creature caught her. Joel was still outside trying his best to knock down the door. The creature skinned its own face, which had many teeth, making Rose open its mouth wide like Laura's. The creature possessed Rose's small body, which was forced to gape viciously. After a while, Joel manages to break through the door of the house and goes in to save Rose. It turned out that the woman was in front of the window, with a body covered in gasoline. Rose turned around with a smile on her lips. The creature manages to enter Rose's body and commits suicide by setting herself on fire. Joel froze at the sight of this unfortunate incident, and the film ended. Rose actually describes the condition of many people in the real world, namely those who divert their past nightmares by working, On the other hand, Holly deflects her guilt by feigning empathy. Many people who experience mental illness are considered crazy, even though the two things have different substances. Through Joel's character, the audience is reminded that help can come from anyone, including from someone who may never have imagined before. This film conveys a message about how difficult it is to face one's own anxiety and past trauma. If you realize it too late, it will end like Rose, who lost the battle against her own mind and died a suicide. While Joel, who helped, was affected and had to experience severe trauma throughout his life. It is necessary to remember, when you feel that no human being can help, then there is God Almighty who gives help, strength, and safety. Thank you and goodbye.